Podcast consumption on YouTube is on the rise, and we're going to talk about it in 3, 2, 1. Okay, recently I was reading a report by Veritonic that showed up in my email, and it had a lot of information about YouTube and YouTube podcast kind of analytics that are tied together. And I'm going to be reading a bunch of these to you. Before we begin, my name is Rich Cardona. If this is your first time watching or listening to me ever, I'm a podcast producer. Our team produces some of the world's top podcasts, and our goal is to just give you as much podcast information as possible, as authentically as possible, without trying to sell you anything or enlist you for our services. We just want you to have a good podcast. Okay, so here's the deal when it comes to the podcast report from Veritonic. 78% of podcast listeners who are aware of YouTube have actively utilized its free version to consume podcasts. What does that mean in plain English? It means if I listen to podcasts, and maybe I usually do it when I'm working out, or maybe I do it when I'm on a walk, whatever it may be, you are probably aware of YouTube. 78% of people who do both of those things are actually using YouTube now to consume podcasts. That is a pretty big deal. Okay, that is a pretty big deal. I love to say the writing is on the wall. The reason I'm even making this video is because you need to know something really important, and that is that times are changing. Podcast discoverability is usually only one of a couple ways. One of them is word of mouth. Word of mouth is great. If I hear Joe say, Rich, you need to listen to this podcast, I listen to it, and then I'm thankful for Joe. If it's an awesome podcast, I tell Joe, please don't recommend any more podcasts if it was a bad podcast. But either way, that leads to discoverability. This is very, very, very different than you discovering a creator on Instagram when you're scrolling. That's easy. It's already planned out. Their hook, the graphics, the content of the video, it's made to stop you from scrolling. A podcast, you search for a podcast by design because you either know the person whose podcast it is and you type in their name into a podcast directory, or someone referred you to it and you type in the podcast name and then you go find it. But you cannot tell me that you ever went on your phone or on your computer and went to a podcast app like Apple Podcasts or Spotify and just started scrolling and saw a podcast cover art and were like, that seems like something I should listen to. This is a word of mouth thing. If you don't have the word of mouth thing going, the only other way you can get discovered is by paid ads or just media. It means promoting on social, it means promoting on podcast platforms, and that's a really, really slippery slope because you can get into the place of paying and paying and paying to make sure that people are consuming you. And if you are not actually making money, if there's not a tangible ROI or a return on that investment, then you're gonna get sick of it, and then it's probably gonna make you wanna quit. Now, again, those are what is traditionally happening, but YouTube is a beast. YouTube is owned by Google. YouTube is the second largest search engine in the world. And what they realized was that organically, without really doing anything, people were starting to put their podcasts on their platform and people were starting to consume it more and more and more. Podcast consumption goes up every year. So YouTube is like, bet, let's make a podcast page. So you got a podcast page on YouTube now, and that is why discoverability is happening. I believe I read in a report, it was something along the lines of, I think it was between 39 and 41% of people who discovered a new podcast did it on YouTube, not any of the other ways. That's a pretty big deal. This is YouTube's first step into even like talking about podcasts. Meanwhile, you got Spotify, you got Apple dumping billions of dollars into this industry to make sure that you remember there's another medium out there that a lot of people sleep on and you should pay attention to it, so please come listen to us. YouTube hasn't had to do any of that. So now that they're actually putting gas on the fire, you should probably pay attention. So let's get into a couple of the other stats that I think are extremely, extremely relevant for you as someone who is thinking about podcasting or podcasting without video, because this might change your mind about a couple things. Here we go. 54% of podcast consumers report that watching podcasts on YouTube because they like to see their host and guests having conversations as opposed to just listening. It doesn't mean they don't like to listen, but there's just a point where they're like, I want to see what this dude Rich is talking about. Or I want to see this Alex Hormozy guy. Like, what the heck? This dude's crazy looking and he's wearing a tank top and he seems so aggressive, but he's brilliant. People want to start to see, and then they become infatuated again with the personality. Now they get to see you, now they get to hear you, and then they get to just ingest more of your personality and have a relationship with you, whether you know it or not. Another big one, 46% report that they pay more attention to the show and the conversations they have when they can physically see. Why? Because if I'm talking to Joe on the phone, if I'm talking to my wife on the phone, if I'm talking to someone from my team on the phone, the chances of me doing something like walking around and getting water while I'm talking to them, or petting my dog, or throwing something away are high. Podcasts were designed to be something that allows you to multitask. But this is saying people are paying more attention if they actually get to watch you the same way you would in a real life conversation with someone who you're meeting for coffee or for lunch. So just look at it that way. Big deal. 46%. I mean, we're pretty much right there at halfway. So keep that in mind. 2 more, and then we'll wrap it up. Again, if you are enjoying this content, follow us, subscribe to this page, hit the notification button, or you can go to Insta at @RichCardona_, and you will find me doing all kinds of crazy stuff starting at 4 in the morning. All right, 77% report being more engaged in a podcast when they are watching it as opposed to just listening to it. So there's the 46% who are paying more attention, 77% means they're more engaged. All this means is like they're just less distracted. Engaged means they're actually hanging on your word. They probably are receiving it and storing it better in their mind, in their brains. But engaged just means like they're just getting a little bit less distracted. 77%, that's a pretty big deal. Pretty big deal. So again, while people are used to consuming podcasts because it allows them to multitask, consumer behavior, podcast listener behavior is a better way to put it, is changing. It's literally up to you. Okay, like there's a million benefits to podcasting generally, but like just think, do you want people who are more engaged? Probably. Do you want people who are paying more attention? Probably. Do you want people who want to see you? Probably. Last stat. This is the best one. 87% report feeling more connected to the podcast host and their guests when they are watching them speak as opposed to just listening. Do you want to feel connected to your listeners? Do you want to feel connected to the people who are watching you? I'm pretty sure the answer is yes. That connection is the difference between someone who's going to be a longtime follower, a super fan, someone who purchases your product, someone whose life you could change. I mean, I cannot emphasize it enough. Connection is the entire premise of podcasting. I always like to say it is the most intimate form of marketing. This is what allows people to feel like they actually know you. We all long for connection, despite being stuck on our phones all day, in the Starbucks line, or whatever it is you do, trying to kill time to just not be bored. But if you feel more connected to someone and they are able to establish a connection, even if it's just virtually, that is just in your favor and it is in their favor as well. It is going to influence you to continue to podcast. It's going to influence you to engage more with your audience. It's going to influence you to record more. It's going to influence you to do better. So thank you, Veritonic, for that report. Those are the major stats I wanted to share. As a bonus, I have just 2 more that I just scrolled really quick. These are relevant, okay? You're watching on YouTube, and I want to help you out. So here it goes. 65% of those that watch a podcast show on YouTube are consuming it for the first time. They're discovering you for the first time on a platform that's video-centric, not just audio-centric. See what I'm saying here? The last stat, 35% of viewers will watch a podcast episode on YouTube after having listened to it on an audio streaming service first. Like, does it get better than that? Someone listened to my episode and then they're gonna go watch it even though they heard it because they wanna feel more connected, because they wanna be more engaged, because they wanna pay more attention. This is the horse smelling the barn, he's coming home. Okay, so we are gonna wrap this with all that information that you can utilize. If you are a marketer working at a company that you're like, we suck at social and content, you could go show them this video and then they might change their mind about the type of content they're making or the type of content that's gonna actually connect with your audience or the company's brand. If you are a solopreneur looking to educate other young entrepreneurs, or you've made it and you've crossed a six-figure threshold or seven-figure threshold or whatever, now you could look at this medium a little bit differently than everyone just being like, everyone's got a podcast, which everyone doesn't. There's only about 3 million that exist, but you think people are gonna be bored because they just listen to a podcast, but now you know that they're watching too, and that watching is actually important to people. Use this information to just help you make an educated decision. I don't benefit if you start a podcast or not, except being completely humbly happy about it if you happen to do it, but I don't benefit. I just want you to have the information you need to make an educated decision, because I just don't think there's a lot of people putting this information out there, and I want to be the guy to help you. Our team wants to be the people to help you just get that information. So if you enjoyed this, you know the deal. Subscribe, hit the bell, let us know what you thought, let us know what could be done better. Obviously, hit us with any questions that we could potentially answer for you, and we will see you next time.